to be Christian is to be concerned for the poor. Christians are supposed to be identified for our love. Hi everyone, Angelo here. I'm a creative and theologian, and it's the 26th Sunday in Ordinary Time. So like last week, we are in chapter 16 of Luke. And it starts off by Jesus saying to the Pharisees, and then Luke leads us into this parable. And it's a fairly well-known parable. It's the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. So there's this rich man of stupidly ostentatious wealth. And then there is Lazarus, who lives in abject poverty. And they come to the point where, so both live their life, one in total wealth, the other in total poverty. Comes to the point where they both die. And then the rich man now, he in torment, right? So Jesus says here that he's in Hades. And he look over and he realize, oh wait now, Lazarus day with Abraham. So he shout out to Abraham and say, please have pity on me. And he's saying too, he said, well, send Lazarus to give me some water now. And Abraham is saying, well, no, first off, you had your time, and second of all, he can't do that even if he wanted to anyway. So the rich man go on further and he say, okay, well, is it that you could send Lazarus back to the rest of my brothers and them so that he could warn them? And Abraham says to the rich man, here now, they have everything they could possibly need if they do want to change their ways. Lazarus, even if he was to come back from the dead, if they don't want to change their ways, then he ain't going to convince them either. And that is how the parable ends. So, I'm curious, last week would have been addressed to the disciples, and this week is addressed to the Pharisees. Although, at this point of Christian history, or at least in Trinidad and Tobago, I am not sure how different the two categories are, the way we just get on sometimes. But nevertheless, we have another parable this week. So, similar to the last few weeks where these parables would have been unique to Luke, same way too with this week. We have this parable that is only found in Luke. So we have two people in this parable. One is the infamous rich man, as we would have heard, and the other is Lazarus. Ironic though, that Lazarus, the poor one, brings more wealth to us in this human experience of ours than money and wealth and power ever could. Now Christ, he focuses a lot on wealth in the Gospel of Luke. And we've been seeing that the last few weeks, yeah? And it's because the Lucan community, they needed help to be able to learn how to be a Christian community, as opposed to claiming Christianity, but then being enslaved by wealth and ignorance. And I don't just mean ignorance like a general unawareness, but more so this intentional unawareness, or a refusal to know what God really requires of people to do for others. So in the ancient Hebrew tradition, there is major concern for the poor. It was all through scriptures, and it was supposed to be in the culture as well. So when we have poverty crushing Lazarus in this story, and then the rich man with more than enough, ignoring Lazarus's basic need for survival, is not because the rich man didn't know that he was supposed to help Lazarus. He knew, He just couldn't be bothered. Because the wealth in his bank account was enough for him to focus on that and totally ignore the pain of his brother in need. It seems like he knew Abraham though, since later on in the parable he could call out to Abraham by name to try to get some sort of reprieve. So similar to the Pharisees that Jesus would have addressed at the beginning of this parable. And if we would read earlier on in the chapter, so that would be between last week and this week, you would see some instances with the Pharisees and whatnot where they snaring at Jesus and thing too. But similar to the Pharisees, he would have known his tradition. And same way too, he probably knew how to navigate around the truth of the tradition then, And he would have known how to navigate having to face the truth that if he wasn't checking for the poor, then he might as well hadn't been Jewish at all. And honestly, I think, or at least I would agree totally with this idea. Because if as Christians we aren't prioritizing the needs of the poor, then we're not being Christian. And it's like the Beatitudes would show us. To be Christian is to be concerned for the poor. And of course, it isn't limited to material poverty alone. But in a society like ours in Trinidad and Tobago, where like 1 in 4 people are living below the poverty line, and then on the other side, we have some individuals who could spend fractions of our national budget in a night or two. Yeah, material poverty has to be a part of this conversation. And this isn't to sow further division in our already torn nation. But as long as the gap between rich and poor, between the poorest and the richest, is as wide as this afterlife gap between the rich man and Lazarus, then no amount of political language could resonate with our justice. So all this UN General Assembly and whatnot taking place this week, unless we see an action behind it, then it will continue to remain nice, flowery language, decorating pages and web pages and all of that, but still people suffering. Now, for the most part of Christian history, and especially Caribbean history, the comfort of the status quo was supported by this idea that if you were born into poverty or enslavement, then that was the will of God. But I think, like the Latin American liberation theologians would have explored and would show us, Christianity has to wholeheartedly reject the idea that injustice is God's will. And we have to start asking questions about who do these ideas really serve? Because just at a glance alone, Scripture proves that God is with the oppressed. And keeping the liberation theologians of Latin America in mind, there's this quote by Gustavo Gutierrez, who, as we know, is widely considered to be the father of liberation theology. And the quote goes like, "You say you love the poor, then name them." Which is what we see happening in today's story also, where while we don't know the origins of Lazarus being named, and even possibly at some point the rich man might have had a name too, Dives or Divis, or I don't know how it's pronounced that, but whatever his name would have been, the version of Scripture that we do have that would have been passed down to us, it names Lazarus. It identifies, all Scriptures identify Lazarus by name, and it identifies the rich man by his possessions. But as we know, wealth and material things are fleeting. Like Bob Marley would say, right? Money can't buy life. And that is what we see in here. Because both men died. One was carried by the angels, and the other was buried in I presume, a luxurious manner. Same state, but the quality of their state was way different. Because one was resting in peace, while the other still studying himself. Because Tekin, he tried to still objectify Lazarus too. He tried to press Abraham to press Lazarus into subservience. So it goes to show that he had a memory of Lazarus and he was aware of who Lazarus was. Meaning in this existence, he just could not be bothered. I think the takeaway from this reading though, I think if we understood it in terms of transaction, then that would be a mistake. Meaning that to think of this reading like saying something like, you have to do good in order to get back good. Or you're doing good, so let's just say, for example, we're choosing to help the poor because we're saying that God will owe us after that. That's to completely miss the point. So if the rich man had used this time in life to help Lazarus just to post on social media or to be able to throw it in God's face, then that's not true religion. And as Caribbean people know so well, if we're not doing it from our heart, if we are not doing it from a place of autonomy, which our autonomy was suppressed for so long, if we ain't doing it from here, then why are we doing it? Like the passage of that famous passage in the book of James would tell us. True religion is to check for the poor and the marginalized. It's for us to be able to identify the vulnerable by name, as opposed to being identified by the things that we own. So Christianity isn't about giving and taking. No? It's about giving because God gives it all for us. It's about trusting in divine providence and not in power and wealth. It's about securing ourselves and society through bringing about proper justice here, today, now. Not telling people that they will get the reward in the afterlife. Trust and believe, when we do good in this life, we already have a reward. Because we get to participate in God's mission of salvation for all of creation. And again, that's not just something that happens at the end of life or time, however it might go. That starts here. I mean, for my part, my faith is in the youth of our nation. And believe it or not, because I am so critical, my hope is in the clergy too. I think they have the best chance of empowering our church. It's just so hard for them to be able to empower their church and be able to pastor their flock when their vows of obedience land them in situations where they end up with a set of deteriorating buildings and increase in debt. But I mean, regardless of whoever we are, rich or poor, clergy or lay, young or old, we all have to lend a hand if we hope for better. So however you participate is something only you can determine. Because nobody can participate for you. So I pray that your prayer life shows you how to participate. But at the end of the day, Christians are supposed to be identified for our love. And it's not, we don't get identified for the amount of priests that we have at our events and our ceremonies, or the cathedrals that we renovate, or the amount of rules that we could follow or boxes we could check to try to somehow convince God that we deserve a space in heaven. That's not what makes us Christian. What makes us Christian is our love. So let's not wait for Father Abraham to have to send us somebody from the dead. We already know what we need to do. Anyways, that's it from me this week. And as always, I appreciate you so much for watching. Thank you.